Okay, so my name is Bob Fisher, and I'm going to be chairing this meeting for a little bit. And Andy Warhol said in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. Mine will probably last as chair of the Growth Council for about 5 minutes. So
Stage a coup.
that's right. We didn't even get a chance to say hello.
So great.
Okay, we can have a call to order and roll call. So why don't we start maybe on my right with Jared? If you could let people know who you are and what agency you're what agency you're representing.
I apologize. Jared Blumenfeld. I am the Secretary of California, California Environmental Protection Agency. I was looking at Wade and thinking of natural resources. Nearly, we spend so much time together, like mind meld. I've already done a tour of potential prospective Strategic Growth Council sites with some of our members. It was really great to get out in the field and just see the amazing work that the Strategic Growth Council is doing. So I'm glad to be here.
My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I'm serving as the Secretary of the Natural Resources Agency. And I'd just like to announce that I took a selfie of myself with Louise and staff and sent it to Randall Winston, who's a former colleague from the Brown administration. So glad to be serving in this capacity.
Hi, I'm Marlon Flournoy. I'm with the California State Transportation Agency, and I'm here representing Secretary Brian Annis.
Hi, Kate Gordon, Director of the Office of Planning and Research, and very happy to be here. We are the home agency of OPR and SGC.
Bob Fisher, I'm the longest serving member of the Strategic Growth Council, originally appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger, then again by Governor Brown. And I'm really excited to see fresh faces here. And we'll have a little conversation, I think, at the end of this about our hopes for the Growth Council. But I think there's lots of opportunity with this group, and I'm excited about the new members.
And I'm Michael Flatt. I'm one of the community members. I was appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly, Anthony Rendon.
Hi, I'm Jenny Lester Moffett, Undersecretary at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and I am here on behalf of Secretary Ross, who sends her regards.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mike Wilkening, Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Good afternoon. Lynn Von Koch-Liebert, Deputy Secretary of Housing at Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, representing Secretary Podesta.
Great, thanks. We'll move on now to the third agenda item, approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion? Any comments on a motion? I guess first is the right order here. I've been.
So moved.
Is there any discussion? I guess most of you are not on the. Okay. Any comments about the minutes from anyone that was at the meeting? Do we have no comments heard? Can I get a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, that passes. We'll move now on to council election. It's customary that the Growth Council have both a chair and a vice chair. If there is there a nomination for council chair?
There is. I would nominate Kate Gordon to be chair. I'm really excited about the potential of her serving as leader, both given her background in creativity and her leadership of OPR, which you've identified as essentially the host entity for the Strategic Growth Council.
Terrific, thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor of Kate Gordon? Can I hear yay?
Yay.
Yay.
Any opposition? No. Okay, congratulations. And I guess you can now take over for the vice chair.
Thank you. And I just want to say, although I haven't been here to see it, I've heard nothing but great things about Bob's leadership of this group and just role in these issues in general. So thank you for everything you've done. Sad in some ways to lose you in that role, but I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity, so thank you, guys. I have chaired commissions before, but they all have their own culture, so if I do something that isn't right, please let me know. So now I think we have to move on to the nomination for vice chair. I believe I'm in charge of that now that I'm chair. Do we have a nomination for vice chair?
I nominate Mike Flad.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye, I guess.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Not even me.
Mike, are you willing to take on this role? Great. And I have to say, I really like the idea of a public member being the vice chair. I think that's really important. So thank you for being willing. Great. All right. So moving on, we did a little of this at the roll call, but maybe to do it a little bit more to the council members update. And I don't know if folks have updates, but I would be great to hear from the new folks, especially sort of what you're excited about when it comes to the Strategic Growth Council when you give your updates. So I don't know if anyone has an actual update to give. This is probably where we do announcements and things like that. So are there any announcements, or can we just go down the line and kind of get a little bit of an update on what you're excited about?
Yeah, typically, just as a matter of history, what we've typically done is, if any of the members have had items that have gone on in their agencies that they wanted to share across agencies, this is a good opportunity. So if you've been working on a project or a report has been recently issued that you think that other members of the committee would be interested in, this is a good opportunity. So I'd say about half the time people will add something.
Great. All right, so since we have so many new folks, let's use this as an opportunity for slightly longer introductions plus updates. How does that sound? Wade, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start with an update. So the Natural Resources Agency has in it, of course, CAL FIRE, and Governor Newsom, in his first full day in office, issued an executive order charging CAL FIRE with producing a report within 45 days, specifically focused on immediate, medium, and longer-term actions to protect vulnerable communities from wildfire. So I wanted to just give a bit of a status report on that, which is later in the week, on Friday is really the end of that 45-day period, and CAL FIRE will be transmitting a report back to the governor, specifically focused on those recommendations. As part of the executive order, CAL FIRE has consulted with a number of different departments and agencies in the state, including OPR and others. So we expect that 45-day report will contain recommendations, again, focused on protecting vulnerable communities from wildfire that have impact on some of our agencies represented here on the council. That's the update. And then just by way of introduction, I'm excited to sit on this side of SGC. I spent 5 years in the Brown administration, including a couple of years at the Office of Planning and Research, when SGC was in a sort of a nascent stage. So it's been really nice to watch it grow and really become more central to the discussion of sustainability and climate change in the state. And kudos to the team at SGC that's doing the work day in and day out. Big thanks to Julie Alves, who's been our key staff person at Resources Agency. I've heard great things just about how SGC is working across agency to really integrate the work through its funding, and I'm looking forward to being part of it. Thank you.
All right, other announcements, or do folks just want to do a little bit more of an introduction of their agency, who they are, their agency, and what their background and what they're excited about? Why don't we just start on this side since we started on the other side last time?
Sure. So Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, as the name entails, does a lot. Wide sweeping around consumer protection, and particularly for this council, housing and homelessness. So some of the things that the agency has recently accomplished, so I just want to share with the group. We successfully distributed $500 million in grants to local jurisdictions for direct support to homeless individuals through services and projects. And we were able to distribute that money in under 6 months, going from starting up a new program and actually getting the funds out to the jurisdictions. So for anyone who's interested in kind of learning more about that model and how we were able to achieve that so quickly, we're very willing to share because we think it's a pretty exciting concept. One of the things that we're really, that we really enjoy about being part of this council and that we look forward to, particularly with Some of the new direction from in the governor's budget is about the linkages with housing and transportation. As the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program and the Transformative Climate Communities Program have rolled out and been, great successes in helping jurisdictions really think through holistically how they can link these two very important subjects, both for the reduction of greenhouse gas as well as the increase in housing. We now see we have these models that work really well that bring communities together and that give us a tool to reach across departments. And as now we're being tasked with expanding that model and looking across our respective agencies, we're just really excited to have this body and these projects that we can turn to. So very excited to be here, and thank you.
Mike Wilkeny with Health and Human Services. What I've enjoyed about this council is that, and similar to what's just being said, is being able to look at the large issues that are affecting the state and broadly address that across multiple agencies in one single venue. And then also to get the input from the public at the same time, and all of us hearing the same messages and figuring out collaboratively how to address those challenges. Particularly with HHS, the issues around housing, we're really interested in continuing to engage there. Health in all policies, which started out in public health and then has been brought into this venue, is an area that we continue to want to engage in. And then climate change broadly is one that I think we all share, that we need to figure out some solutions there. So looking forward to working with the new members on that.
I'll just give a quick update. Nicole Capritz, again, public member. So I reside in San Diego, and there's a lot of folks in San Diego who have never heard of SGC, and so we're trying to change that. We're in that process of trying to expand awareness about the opportunities involved with cap and trade funds, and obviously cementing the connection between housing and transit and equity. And so one of the things I'm going to ask for today, I didn't ask Louise this in advance, is just kind of understanding where I can point the public to in terms of what are the various pots of money that are available at the state level to help San Diego participate in this climate transformation we're trying to achieve. And the only announcement I will make is that I, along with our other new commissioner, Jared, and Louise and some other folks from SGC, had the incredible opportunity to go to Los Angeles and get a tour of the AHSC project in South Central. And then the next day, Louise and I went to Watts, and they're one of the first implementers, or they're about to be. They're one of the first grantees of the transformative climate communities. And I found both projects awe-inspiring. It was extraordinary to see the collaboration and connection between all of the stakeholders, and the community really was driving the conversation of both of those areas and both of those projects. And it was just obvious that this is the model, this is the future, this is exactly what we're here for, and this is exactly what we want to do and invest in, so that communities can learn how to come together. Because if there's anything we know about the climate crisis, it's that people are going to need each other, right? Everybody's fates are tied together. And unfortunately in San Diego, I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I say this, we struggle. We operate in silos, a lot of our agencies and the community. And so I was just inspired, and I see huge opportunity and potential going forward, and I'm excited to be here and help drive that process.
Hi, so Jenny Lester Moffett, again, Undersecretary at the Department of Food and Agriculture. I have been at the department for 4 years, serving as key staff for Secretary Ross for the Strategic Growth Council. And what I've really enjoyed about the council, kind of echoing certainly what others have said, is the interconnectedness of all of the issues that certainly a lot of us work on a daily basis. And certainly food and agriculture is the nexus of a lot of those conversations as well. So in the programs that the Strategic Growth Council has through housing, through transformative climate communities, really integrating food access, food deserts, those conversations into the mix as well. The SALC program, and certainly we've partnered a lot with Julie and the Resources Agency and Department of Conservation on the SALC program, the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program. There is a tremendous nexus between our Healthy Soils program and the Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program. And so we've had a lot of active conversations about how do we work on really blending those synergies together in a way that really makes sense and works for agriculture, works for land conservation, works for soil carbon sequestration. I do have one update on that program, actually on all of our programs. We have 4 programs that are right now out for requests for proposals. So our Healthy Soils program and our SWEEP program, which is our Water Efficiency and Enhancement program. Both programs have RFPs out right now that are due at the beginning of March. And then we have the Dairy Digester program and the Alternative Manure Management programs. And those have RFPs that are out right now also and due at the beginning of April. So we have $99 million for our manure management programs. We have $15 million for our Healthy Soils program. And I'm blanking now, but I think it's $10 million. No, it's $20 million. Sorry, $20 million for our SWEEP program. Sorry about that. And so those are all out right now for a request for proposals. And they're primarily funded through the climate investments, but also some is funded as SWEEP, and Healthy Soils also have some Prop 68 dollars as well. So certainly let people know.
And I'm Mike Flatt again, or Michael. I'm your appointee from Anthony Rendon. In my day job, I'm a city manager. I've been a city manager for 10 years. I'm currently a city manager in Southgate, which is located in southeast Los Angeles. If you look it up, it's a disadvantaged community. It's eligible for quite a bit of the funding that comes across here, although we haven't applied as an individual city. Before that, I was city manager in the city of Burbank, and that's where I was born and raised. I worked for the city of Burbank for 23 years, so have seen well, it's about a 30-year career now, but it's seen 2 very different environments within which to try to operate from a bureaucrat's perspective. And I've been blown away by the 2 years that I've had the opportunity to serve on this council. Staff does a tremendous job. Some of the hardest working, most talented staff I think I've ever seen. And then just the efforts and the commitment of each one of the departments has really been outstanding. And I think when you have an outsider's perspective, like I did, local government being the one perspective, and then outside of Sacramento being the other perspective, you're not sure what to expect, right? And I think I used the word expect about 10 times just then, but truly impressed with the quality of folks that have sat in these chairs and the dedication, the commitment to truly making our environment better, making our futures better. I always tell the story, I was diagnosed with asthma when I was a teenager in Burbank. We had stage 3 smog alerts. You couldn't see the foothills most of the time. And during the summers, you're just flat out told not to go outside, which seems very foreign now. I was there when the doctor diagnosed my daughter with asthma, environmentally induced, same concept. And I truly, truly envision an environment in California where my grandchildren will not be diagnosed with asthma or environmentally induced asthma. So that's sort of my personal commitment. And then truly, I think, Nicole and I are starting to feel like we're going to be the external marketing reps for the council. And we take that to heart. I've toured most of the TCC sites. I think if you get the opportunity, I really recommend doing that. It truly is transformative, not just for the communities, but for anyone that gets to be exposed to the folks that have put together these applications. The application process itself is transformative, and that's what we heard all last year as folks were making their pitch for their particular project was just, get the grant or not, how transformative and collaborative the process was. And so I definitely want to make sure that we continue to see that. But it's been a very rewarding experience in unexpected ways, and I expect you'll all have similar experiences over this next year.
Thanks. Bob Fisher. I'm my day job is chairman of the Gap. It's a company that I've worked at for about 30 plus years, something that actually my father started. So that was one of the ways I got into it. So I'm a retailer by training, involved in the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, but I was appointed to the Growth Council because our family has timber property in Northern California, Mendocino Redwood Company and Humboldt Redwood Company, and so it was through those investments actually that I qualified as a member of the council. And I think like many of the, what I really appreciate about this group now is that there's a combination of both long-serving members and new members. And I think as with any council and any new administration, there's going to be an influx of new ideas, which is fantastic. And hopefully the old members won't say, we can't do that because it didn't work before. You know, I think there is, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, because I think Louise has got some time down in agenda item 8 to talk about activities and goals later on. But it has been a very rewarding experience for me, my first public service, and to see the dedication both by staff and by the council members. And we've had great attendance. For those of you that are new agency secretaries, I've always been impressed by the attendance that the agency secretaries themselves have made themselves available, come to this council. One of the great purposes is to be able to sit up here on the dais with colleagues and to share ideas and to perpetuate the notion that I think the council was created under, which was to collaborate and to not operate in silos and to work together. And we have some, you know, when we first started out, I think it took a while for the council to really figure out what the right direction was for us to take. As we received more money from the state, we got more clarity on that, and I think some of the funding programs are, in my mind, amongst the best that the state has going, because they've got input from every different agency, and rather than do things that work for one group but don't work for another, everybody contributes on this council, and the ideas are really very multi-agency, cross-agency, and I think you know, as the state thinks about how we're going to grow from 30 to 50 million people, if that's what we're going to get to, and if we're not strategic about it, if we try to operate in silos, it's not going to be the kind of place any of us want to live, where we're going to want to raise our children. On the other hand, I've got great optimism that with people like those of you that are serving up here, we're going to come up with the right answers. So I'm excited to hear the discussion later on about what kind of aspirations everybody has. Thanks.
Thanks. I'll go down that way and then come back to myself. Jared, you want to? I'm in from the edges.
So the thing that I'm most excited about is when you think of this big, looming and existing existential threat that is climate change, it's really difficult for people to internalize it into what it means for them day to day. What does it mean for their communities? We had SB 375, which kind of started the discussion of land use planning and how transit and transit-oriented development and low-income housing all comes together. This is the place that all comes together. And you know, just reading the 10-year report, thinking about even just the concept of thinking about transformative climate communities as a concept, we're at the front, we're at the vanguard nationally, internationally, of thinking how that happens. The cool thing about the Strategic Growth Council, which everyone's kind of alluded to, is we've got collaboration, right, and money. So we can make things happen in communities. And I think that's what's been lacking. Communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, have kind of been overpromised and underdelivered. And we can help sort some of that out through the Strategic Growth Council. My goal, aspiration, just kind of riffing off what Bob was saying, is really to think about how this becomes the template of what the state does in all its projects. I don't want to think of like, this is a Strategic Growth Council project on transformative communities. Like, how do we make sure that all the transportation money, all the housing money, the gas tax money, all the things that we do need to conform with this? Like, we don't have the option to silo our funding for transformative climate solutions. So that will be, I think, my biggest push is how we normalize this within state government. And we have all the people on the dais right now that can help start to make those decisions. So I just want to give real credit to Louise and Jesse and whole team for pushing to make this a reality. It isn't easy to do something like this, of this scale. And when we were down talking to a community that Nicole, Mike, and I, and Louise and others were down talking to folks on the corner of Manchester and Vermont, which is where the Rodney King riots happened in 1992. The building has remained vacant, burnt out shell until now. And this, to the extent that we decide to fund it, and then many projects like it, it really does. It's just not lip service to transformation. It really is seeing in people's eyes and expressions, like they said they'd been to 4 ribbon cuttings at this one place because everyone had came with promises. They'd done the ribbon cutting, the money never came through. So helping California, and to build on Jenny's point, I'm really excited about soil health and thinking about how the sustainable agriculture and land conservation work can have teeth in the easements that promote soil health so that we're getting even more carbon benefit for our bang is really important. But I'm excited.
Hi, I'm a Deputy Secretary for Transportation Planning for California State Transportation Agency. And we oversee departments such as Caltrans, CHP, the California Transportation Commission, and a few others. And, you know, over the past, I'll probably say, 8 to 10 years, we've been thinking a lot about sustainability and what that means, and, how to integrate, active modes of transportation into the transportation system, how to think about climate change and what it means to the transportation system. And one of the things I really appreciate about the Strategic Growth Council is, it's really bringing all those different elements in a way where, we can think about how to integrate all those things. And most recently, to Governor Newsom's comments about housing production, we've been spending a lot of time thinking about transportation investments and how they can be used to, to increase housing production and, really, make it more viable, not only for cities, but developers. And so, with some of the programs such as TCC and AHSC, those programs are already starting to think about, some of these things and where the intersection points are. And so it's just great having a diverse, group of people here that are representing, different backgrounds to help sort of think through these things. And as we start thinking, what it means for Caltrans, what it means for HCD, what it means for, California Transportation Commission, I think we have some great examples to look at in terms of the work that's been done with the council here, and we're looking to learn and figure out what sort of things that we can sort of bring back to these programs. So we're not thinking through the silo lens, but we're thinking how to work together and how to leverage as much as we can. So thank you.
So inspiring. So just a quick note on sort of why I'm excited about this. One of the things that made me want this job was the ability to sit on the Strategic Growth Council, because I think it's a place, as you have all said, that really brings just not the theory of what it means to grow sustainably in the state, but actually the reality on the ground. And we often hear about what doesn't work, and a lot of people are fighting things, and this is sort of a council of what works, which I think is incredibly exciting. I will say to both Nicole and Mike that I think people in Sacramento don't know what SGC is either. I don't think it's just San Diego. So it's incumbent. One of the things, I come from a background of strategic communications and policy, and it's very important to me too that we tell the story more broadly, and especially with a governor who's so committed to housing and transportation working together along with meeting our climate goals and really being best in class. I think this is an opportunity to figure out what that looks like. And from the OPR perspective, I'm fortunate to have the same role that Ken Alex did, which is the dual title of Senior Advisor to the Governor on Climate, as well as being the head of OPR. And so for me, climate is infused in every decision, right? And so I think it's from the OPR perspective, really exciting to sort of say, what do we do at OPR on the sort of the guidelines and the policy and the theory of what 50 million people by 2050 looks like, and then looking to SGC for how does that actually work, and what do we look at as best practices, and how do we elevate those and leverage those and grow those. That's super exciting to me. Those two things go hand in hand. So we're working a lot internally to marry those things a little more at OPR, and I'm thrilled to get a chance to be up here with all of you. So Thank you. That was great. Those were great updates. We do have an opportunity in number 8 here on the agenda to talk about our big picture goals for, which Jared already sort of started us on, for what do we do in the year forward. But first, we have business. So moving on to item 6, which is the consent calendar. Louise, do you want to give a little background on that item?
Yes, I will quickly run through the consent calendar item, which is a technical amendment to the guidelines for this round of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. I will touch on this in the executive director's update, but applications were due last Monday. But as you know, having environmental clearances in hand, both state and federal, so CEQA and NEPA, is a threshold requirement for application. Because of the partial government shutdown, federal government shutdown, some applicants were unable to get their NEPA clearance. And so in consultation with HCD and HUD, we have extended the window to give them 60 days to obtain that clearance post application. So we communicated with applicants that we would be bringing this to the council at this meeting. And we made an amendment, which is noted in the guidelines in your packets, that would allow them 60 days to obtain that clearance, and then an additional 30 days to clear any objections. That is the amendment.
Great. So do we have discussion on this item? Is that normally what we do, is discuss and then vote? We have to vote, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Louise or staff on this item, or discussion on this item? It seems fairly straightforward.
Seems like a really good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it affected, we thought, between 6 to 8 applications.
Yes.
So, full 360 here.
Yeah, the staff are
Sorry.
scattered. They're,
Yes.
great. So do we have a motion on this item?
I'd move to adopt to the executive director's recommendation.
Second? All in favor? Yes or aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? Great. So moved.
Okay.
So passed.
So should I just move on?
Yes, why don't you
Okay.
just move on to your report, since
Okay.
you're in charge of that too.
So normally, we have a lot more staff interaction. Today, the hope is that this will be primarily you guys interacting, I think. So I will tee up a few items between the executive director's report and the next item, and then turn it over to you all. But we do normally do an executive director's update at every council meeting. We will also include in this legislative updates, which Sloan Viola will be in charge of. We don't have any this time, but we will include those. So just a few things. I wanted to provide some program updates, a little bit of staff and organizational updates, and then touch on our operating guidelines. So I just mentioned for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program, we're in the midst of round 4. And the applications were due last Monday, February 11th. We received 47 applications, totaling about $670+ million in funding requests. We have $404 million available. The average funding request was close to $16 million, and this would include, if across all of the proposals, close to 4,800 housing units. We also saw pretty good geographic representation across 10 MPOs and 2 non-MPO regions. We also, one of the questions that had come up was how many of these applications are reapplications from folks who had applied before but not obtained funding. And of these, we have 15 that are reapplications, 7 of which we did provide technical assistance on to support their reapplication, and others who received technical assistance on their own or in other ways. So I think really good uptake of the program, especially in light of it being a lot more funding out there right now because of new housing funding. I think we're excited to think we may be able to hit over 50% of these projects to get funding in this round. So that's great. And the quality of the applications upon first review looks very strong. So that is great news. On January 10th, Governor Newsom released his budget, And I think a lot of good discussion around housing and transportation and the linkages between them. Just some items specific to SGC were, of course, our continuous appropriation of 20% of GGRF to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, which also includes sustainable ag land conservation. The budget included $40 million for transformative climate communities and $10 million for the climate change research program, and staff support for the implementation of Senate Bill 1072, which is the Regional Climate Collaboratives Bill. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. Staffing and organizational update. We have not had any staffing changes, thank God, since December. We're holding steady. So we are working right now internally on an set of organizational goals and work plan. A lot along the lines of what we heard from you all now in terms of thinking about transparency into our programs and making our leadership more visible and known. And then also just working on some of our timelines and communication with you all on a regular basis. So that is all in progress. We are also developing work plans for each of our programs and holding a staff retreat for 2 days early next month to work through a lot of those. Really also looking for how we can build more cross-programmatic linkages and take advantage of some of the cross-cutting issues just even within our programs at SGC. So then finally, I wanted to talk about the SGC Operating Guidelines. If you look on our website and you go to the About SGC page, you will find the operating guidelines, which were approved almost 10 years ago to the day, back in April of 2009. If you look at this, it is very outdated in terms of our membership. It does not include the split of business transportation and housing into 2 separate agencies, nor does it include our the addition of food and ag, or of our additional 2 public members. The funding that it discusses, the process and the programs are all out of date. So we will be working internally and led by our staff counsel, Doug Bojack, to update these guidelines, and we'll bring them back to the council in April, but just wanted to make you all aware that that is something we will be working on. And if you have a chance to take a look at them and have thoughts, please feel free to let me know. So that is the executive director's update.
Great questions for Louise. Comments, questions? Admiration and support, which we all feel, I think, every day. I am personally thrilled that we haven't had staff turnover because it is an incredible staff. So thank you for that, for not turning over. Thank you. Any other comments for Louise, questions for Louise on the update? All right, look at that. That was easy.
So now,
now you wanted to set up, number 8, discussion upcoming activities. Louise was just going to set that up for us a little bit.
yes, so what I wanted to do, and I apologize for those of you who have been around the block a few times, but thought it would be helpful to tee off for your discussion around 2019. What does the year ahead just look like across our programs? And what are some of the things we as staff, either from our engagement and work on the programs or from direction from the council previously are thinking about for the coming year? So I'll just touch quickly on sort of what are some of the overarching program and policy considerations. I'll run through each of our programs and then I will turn it over to you all. So of course, what are our overarching program and policy considerations? First and foremost is support of the governor's priorities around housing and transportation. Of course, trying to increase the production of housing, but in a way that is linked to transportation and will result in low VMT, low sprawl, no sprawl patterns. And then, of course, equity and opportunity for all communities and Californians. And this is a theme that cuts across all of our programs in investment, and then also our policy initiatives like health and all policies as well. Alignment with our state climate goals and activities. And so this is really thinking about how our work is supporting local and regional planning, so how we're supporting implementation of Senate Bill 375, Wildfire recovery and resilience has been an issue that came up quite a bit at the end of 2018, and how can we support that work? And I'll touch on that a little bit, especially in affordable housing and sustainable communities is a topic we've been talking about. And then, of course, with the focus on thinking about high-speed rail in the San Joaquin Valley, how we continue to leverage our partnership with high-speed rail, which I will touch on there as well, and also working with OPR closely on that work. And then also, for folks who were here at the end of 2018, we had a frantic, I came on in June, we had 5 council meetings in 6 months and did a lot of work. And I think one thing we are also really looking at are our program cycles, staffing, how we work together and leverage our resources, and just the long-term sustainability and predictability of our programs. That's just an internal operational goal for ourselves. So I will start with affordable housing and sustainable communities. I already talked about round 4. Review is underway right now. We will be posting award recommendations on June 11th and bringing them to the council on June 21st. And that's our June council meeting date. That said, we are already looking ahead to round 5, to the next round, because we will bring the award recommendations to the council in June, but we will be looking to adopt guidelines for the next round in October. So some of the key issues we're thinking about there are how we better engage and work with the metropolitan planning organizations with an eye towards supporting Senate Bill 375 implementation. We are also having a continued conversation around project area type classification. And so in English, what that means is, what are the categories of projects? We currently have 3 project categories that capture really dense, high-quality transit areas, rural areas, and then what we call interconnected connectivity projects. And we're really constantly looking for how we're dividing, making those characterizations to increase opportunity for all communities in California. And also thinking about that in light of other funding streams that are now available. And so this will be an ongoing analytic exercise for us, as well as just understanding from applicants and communities what this could look like. And then continuing all of our work on capacity building and technical assistance. So we provide technical assistance to applicants. For those who are not ready to apply this year, we will move into a capacity building phase for round 5. We've already started that for fire-affected communities, but we'll continue to think about how do we build that pipeline of projects so that folks are ready to come in with a strong application. This I should also mention for affordable housing and sustainable communities. We will be completing this year our first 12-month cycle of the program, and that has been a goal to get on an annual cycle of the program. I think it's a good model for thinking about how we build a very predictable, structured cycle for the program. So next, sustainable ag land conservation.
Louise, excuse me, a couple questions.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, so I guess you have built in here time to review the existing guidelines and update them. That's a process we've gone through, I guess, not only at the beginning, but between each
Yes.
round to update those with sort of the most current thinking. Is that right?
Yes, we have updated the guidelines for each round of the program, and we will be starting stakeholder engagement. And we're always getting feedback. We'll get post-application feedback. We will do also formal workshops in the lead up to releasing draft guidelines, which will be commented and then brought to the council in October for adoption.
One thing I've mentioned at a couple of different meetings, now that we've been through these cycles a number of times, I think it sort of behooves us to go back and look at much earlier projects and see how those have been implemented. I'm not aware that we've actually done that at any point in time, but I think, we got to, in order to not just keep updating the guidelines with new thinking, I think we've also got to learn from what our successes were once we get things into the projects into the ground and actually even built up. So there's sort of no, we've just got to figure out what the best feedback loop is so that these things can get better and better, and we're not just always updating and moving the goalposts on the guidelines, but also learning from past successes or failures. I mean, we'll learn a lot of things from projects that weren't successful, understanding why they weren't successful. So the more we can build a feedback loop of completed projects into our thinking, I think it'll get us better at what we do.
Great, thanks. That's a great suggestion, and I think the timing is quite good because we're actually really getting to where we're seeing projects, a lot more projects on the ground.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Yes, one comment. One thing that we may want to consider also is, as we're going through the Round 5 guidelines and kind of thinking through the strategy on how best to use this money, is around the fact that we're entering into an era where we have more housing funding than we've had in quite a while. So whereas AHSC has been the predominant housing fund for a number of years, now with SB2 and SB3, No Place Like Home, we're seeing an influx in housing programs that are available all at the same time. So what we might want to do is kind of take a step back and figure out what would be the most appropriate way to use AHSC funding in light of additional resources being on the table.
That's a great point, and just to add quickly to that point, particularly around technical assistance, which Louise brought up, but seems really smart not to duplicate that across a whole bunch of different agencies and different processes if it's all leading to similar goals. It seems like a really big priority. Wait.
Yeah, I was just going to underscore your points, and Governor Newsom has articulated really ambitious priorities on affordable housing in terms of production of housing, and I think the daunting aspect of public programs like this is, they tend to, produce housing, but not the amount of housing that we ultimately need. I noted, $400 million plus generates 4,800 housing units. Obviously, that's critical, but our need is significantly greater than that. And as I said, I think the governor is clearly prioritizing this. I think he's there with Secretary Podesta in Southern California to talk about this today. So just understanding where this really important program fits in, not only with the other programs in terms of production, but just the broad strategy. And if we are going to generate, 3 million new units of housing, really, how are we going to leverage a limited set of public funds to do that? So the extent to which this can dovetail into a broader strategy would be helpful.
And I just have to follow up on that comment and say one of the areas we're struggling with in San Diego is sprawl. And the housing crisis is being used as a way to just say, let's build anywhere, anyhow. And so I also would like to ensure we dovetail this conversation with the idea of, obviously, everything about SGC is ensuring that we're maximizing urban infill. And I just want to not alarm people, note on the ground that we are really struggling with that conversation.
Thanks. And I will say we actually are looking at this question right now at a staff level of actually trying to better characterize all of the different pots of funding and what they do and what they look like. And I think that we can use our interagency teams to really then think strategically. But even just getting that baseline information of here are all these pots of funding and this is what it would do is something we are working on as well, just to try to demystify some of this. Because I think that point is exactly right about we're not the only game in town, which is wonderful. So, then we can figure out what is our best strategic point and how we leverage what we've got here.
I think on that same note, in addition to sprawl, it's thinking about our rural communities in California and how do we look at our programs and align it in ways that best support the needs of rural communities as well. Things like, of course, the governor is very interested in safe and affordable drinking water and addressing those needs for all communities in California. And how do we make sure and ensure that the programs that we have here are not contributing or exacerbating those problems, and perhaps also helping those and providing resources to those rural communities as well.
Just to add to that, this is also just thinking specifically, going to what Wade said, but going to even more specifics, and you talked about this in a couple places, high-speed rail, which you'll get to more, I'm sure, so just to give you an entry point for that. It does, given the governor's speech and the focus on Central Valley economic development and the reality of that portion of the high-speed rail project, is a real opportunity to think about growth done well, and with a rural community context, an ag conservation context, a sprawl context, a climate resilience context. I mean, there's so many things that come together with that set of projects, that seems like a really important area of focus just for this year. So I know you were going to talk a little bit more about the high-speed rail work. Maybe that's a good time to do it, or you have an agenda. I know. Go ahead.
I can jump ahead if you'd like, or I will continue with.
We're so excited about our
I think this is
2019 plans.
great.
We're started already.
I'm going to say as little as possible. So Sustainable Ag Land Conservation, or SALC. So traditionally, SALC has been, we allocate 10% of our Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program to support the SALC program, which does two things. We take about $1 million to support planning grants, and then we do easements on agricultural lands at risk of conversion. This last round, round 4, was awarded in November, and for the first time, the program was oversubscribed, which was great news. We received no planning grant applications in round 4, and so that was a little disappointing. And so we have adopted new guidelines in December that make the planning grants application more flexible. We are also, for the first time, going to be providing technical assistance to land trusts and landowners for applying to SALC. So that will help us understand a little bit more about the uptake of the program. We see some regional disparities there, but we also just hope will continue to increase uptake of the program. Like I said, round 5 guidelines, the process is underway. Pre-applications are due in April, full applications in September. But we are already looking ahead to think about what the future rounds for SALC, and some key questions that have come up that we were unable to address. One is fee title acquisition, so that is the outright acquisition of land as opposed to easements. A lot of discussion that has gone into thinking about co-benefits of SALC, so thinking about water, wildfire, resilience, public health, how we think about those in the program. And then finally, just strategy and alignment with state goals generally. So thinking about how it fits with goals around resilience and food systems and things like that. And so these are some bigger questions that, in talking with Secretary Ross, the Department of Food and Agriculture, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Conservation, who administers this program for us, I think a lot of really interesting longer-term conversations we can be having. So next, I'll just touch on Transformative Climate Communities program. And so this is an annual appropriation. As I said, we had $40 million in the governor's proposed budget. We awarded in round 1 in $140 million for our first round of grantees in 3 locations. About $70 million went to Fresno, about 35 went each to Ontario and Watts. In round 2, we had $50 million available. It was awarded in December to Sacramento and Pacoima, and they each received about $23.5 million. We have been working exceptionally hard over the last year to develop a template for what a grant agreement looks like for this integrated set of projects in one location, and have finally been working closely with staff at Department of Conservation and SGC and all of the awardees to get to the point where we now have grant agreements ready to be executed with each of our round 1 grantees. And then that will smooth our process with round 2, really moving into that post-award consultation where we're sitting down with them, reviewing all of their projects, and expect to execute grant agreements for round 2 in spring or early summer. So these are tremendous projects. I would agree the opportunity to go visit and see them is really incredible, just to see how they're very tailored to a given community. And so they're each quite unique. In addition to those implementation grants, over the last 2 rounds, we have awarded a set of planning grants to 14 communities across the state. Currently, for an implementation grant, it is limited to communities in the top 5% of disadvantaged communities. But the planning grants have been awarded to top 25% communities. So we have a pipeline of projects that are getting developed in a number of different communities across the state, and with a broader range of eligibility than we currently have. So as we're looking ahead to round 3, we are thinking a lot about how we support housing development through TCC. We have opportunities to do more creative approaches to housing, which we saw in Pacoima. And so really just sort of really crystallizing what can housing production look like with TCC, thinking about overlay with opportunity zones, and then again, thinking about eligibility and how do we make TCC available to more communities around California. It is a complex initiative that brings together, and it's community-led, brings together a number of partners and projects. And so the application hurdle is, it's a lot of work to put together an application. I think there are a lot of benefits, but we also are really trying to think about how do we open that eligibility up without having, with a number of communities that would then not be successful in making an application. So that is just an ongoing conversation that we are having. But we do have this broad pipeline of projects building up. Finally, for GGRF, grant funding program, we have our climate change research program. Our round 1 grants are underway. We awarded those in July of 2018. 10 grants that supported a number of projects and partnerships. And then in December, we awarded 4 transformative technology grant partnerships. So larger grants between $3 to $5 million that are looking to broaden the uptake of given processes or technologies. As we're looking ahead, we're really looking at ways to strengthen connections between our funded researchers and state agencies. So for sitting down with each of our grantees and doing kickoff meetings and making connections. Looking ahead, we're thinking about a climate change research symposium this year, which again is really focused on this application policy-oriented research, and doing more engagement around round 3, which would be a notice of funding availability would be made in this fall or winter. So I also want to talk about our technical assistance program. So we have typically taken a portion of our affordable housing and sustainable communities funding. In June of last year, the council allocated $5 million to support technical assistance that we are working with both for our programs, but then we work with other partner agencies and departments across the California Climate Investments portfolio to support technical assistance. We have a number of different models of how we do that. It's been very successful, and that is one of the reasons that the council wanted to expand that work over the last year. So we have an innovative new partnership with the Department of Food and Agriculture and UC Ag and Natural Resources to support climate-smart agriculture work. We also have a number of contracts that are closing out that we've been working with CARB, with CalSTA and Caltrans on active transportation and other work. So looking at that, really trying to think about lessons learned, case studies, so how is this working, what's not working, where are the challenges and barriers to doing this work. We also were allocated $2 million in the budget last year to do a partnership with the Institute for Local Government to provide technical assistance in given locations with local governments. And so that is a partnership. We're just about to finalize that contract and kick off this year. We also, in September of 2018, the governor signed Senate Bill 1072, which focuses on capacity building for regional climate collaboratives, which is intended to build more of on-the-ground support in under-resourced communities across California. And so as I mentioned, this will be a grant program. It currently does not have grant funding allocated to it. We do have several timeline requirements that we need to meet. So in October of this year, we should be putting out some discussion of what a regional collaborative could look like. In July of 2020, we need to provide technical assistance guidelines for other state agencies with how to work with under-resourced communities. So that draws back to some of what we have been learning through technical assistance. It's a really exciting opportunity, this program. We're really looking forward to it, and we will be staffing up over the coming year and hopefully doing a lot of outreach to think about what that could look like. But much more to come on that over the coming year. So then I will just finish with our 2 policy initiatives that we also host at the Strategic Growth Council. First is Health in All Policies. Health in All Policies, as Secretary Wilkening mentioned, began with a partnership with the Department of Public Health. As SGC grew in capacity, we have welcomed the Health in All Policies team into our fold over at 1400 10th Street. And just been a tremendous collaboration that has allowed us to really think about how would we integrate health and equity into our work at SGC. The Health and All Policies team has also hosted the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. So one of the first state-level implementations of this plan, which is really working with, we have a capital cohort, which is a number of agencies and departments getting trained on thinking about racial equity and developing a racial equity action plan. We are in year 2 of the capital cohort, which is moving into how we do implementation of those racial equity action plans. So that is really an outward-facing engagement. It is also something that we at SGC are working on ourselves. So we are working on a racial equity action plan that we will be bringing to you all as the council to adopt for our work, which will touch on our programmatic work and also our operations, so things like hiring and HR and things like that. Health and All Policies is also continuing its work on doing action plans where it works across all of the partner agencies to think about how to integrate health. One this year will be working on a healthy and equitable transportation action plan. And then we're just always continuing to work to think about how to integrate health and all policies into our work. And then finally, Kate, sorry, it was last. We continue our partnership with the High-Speed Rail Authority. We have cross staff, so we have 3 positions at SGC who have been working on a number of initiatives to support high-speed rail, and also really have provided a resource across state agencies in a number of different ways. So we're continuing to support thinking about planning goals in high-speed rail station communities. And so thinking about the station itself, but then the community overall and how it thinks about growth and planning. And then also how we optimize regional conservation outcomes in that work. So we're doing that both by facilitating stakeholder engagement into the conversation around high-speed rail, but then also really terrific work on bringing together tools and data to help inform and think about how you can think about regional conservation goals in planning initiatives. So with that, that is what we have on our plate in short form for the coming year. But I would like to turn it over to you all now. We're happy, of course, to answer any questions, but would love for you all to take it from here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have some questions about my favorite topic, TCC. So I also just want some of the new folks to kind of hear more from you about what is the average award size of a TCC grant?
So TCC has varied quite a bit. As I mentioned, we've had 2 rounds of funding. The first was $140 million, and the second was $50 million. Based on the work that went into round 1, with the intention of the program to really invest and catalyze transformation, the decision was made that about $35 million was a good amount to make that sort of investment. And so we've had 2 awards about that size. We've had 2 less, and then 1 a bit more. So I think that $30 to $35 million is a good threshold, especially if you're thinking about integrating housing into that investment, because housing is very expensive. And so really, if we want to think about this interconnected set of projects that can really catalyze change, that that becomes that $30 to $35 million number is a good one to work from.
Great, yeah. So, and some folks here may know last year there was an attempt that didn't last that long, but to take some of the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities funds and transfer them into TCC as a way to augment some of the housing opportunities with these catalytic investments. So some of the affordable housing advocates did not like that idea. So that idea was shelved. But I do want to highlight that kind of staff is indicating to really make those catalytic changes, the 30 to 35 million is what is needed per grantee. So we have 14 communities, disadvantaged communities, who are in the pipeline right now, who are expecting probably about 30 to 35 million. So that would mean with our current budget, we would be able to do about 1 award this year if we move forward. So then you have 13 other communities who are in line. But that means, so we do 1 a year, so we have 14 years before everyone sort of gets to participate. I'm obviously just trying to make a point that I think right now we don't have enough resources to adequately invest in these communities that not only have, historically not had the resources they deserve, but also we've sort of set it up that they expect there's going to be some investment by the state. Because unlike AHSC, where it's like, we already announced, here's the amount of money we have, you all compete, and we'll see who gets it. For TCC, like, we gave planning grants without really knowing what the money was going to be after they did that planning. So when we get to the goals section, I just wanted to highlight where I thought staff was at in terms of the amount to the investment needed per grantee. That I don't know what's possible for this group, but I did read the letter from CEJA, the California Environmental Justice Alliance, today, kind of asking us to take a more formal position about advocating. I don't really know what's appropriate or what the protocol would be. I, as an individual, will be advocating in the state legislature, maybe with my my co-member. But I just want to point out that we have really well-deserved, we have communities that are not only hoping and counting on really big investments. Not only do we've been to some of these communities now, we've seen the transformative change that's possible. It really, when you see it, when you meet the community members, I mean, they have tears in their eyes. I mean, this is really game-changing stuff. It's really moving. And then number 3, obviously the budget, there's still some opportunity there. So I just want to encourage us to think about how we could maybe do at least 2 awards this year. And so, the ask of some of the stakeholders is for $140 million, because that sort of gets us back to where SGC started with this program. So I know it's all a negotiation, but at the very least, I think if we have 14 communities, and by the way, we have others who are hoping there's going to be more planning grants available, like San Diego, for example. We have yet to apply, and trust me, I hear about it all the time. But if they're like number 15, I'm like, well, we'll see in 15 years. I'm just saying, this is the reality on the ground of what people are thinking about. And so I'm excited, again, with all of the new secretaries here and fresh ideas, but I think there's an opportunity to think through, especially for the next section, like how can we really make this work?
Kate?
Yeah, absolutely. Jared.
Maybe since we're on TCC, it kind of jumps around a little too much if we then go to goals and then go back to TCC. So on this issue, I mean, obviously, if this is the only money that we have going statewide towards transforming communities to make them climate resilient, it's way too little. One of the projects that I was involved in Fresno, which got the $70 million, was called Strong Cities, Strong Communities. And basically what it did with the mayor at the time, Ashley Swearingen, was look at all the federal government programs that are focused on that jurisdiction, and then try to reprogram them to meet the sustainability aims and goals of the city. So I'm thinking, like, rather than just looking at the limited pot that we have on TCC, think about how we reframe some of our work with communities to bring the full weight and budget that we currently have at the state of California to bear to help achieve these goals. Because even if we had 200 million, 300 million is not, it pales in comparison to what we're spending as a state on Fresno, as a state on Bakersfield or Crescent City or any community in California. So I think it'd be really great to think about how we reframe some of our work in coordinating and bringing budgets together and understanding even bring the feds in and say, the Farm Bill just has actually quite a lot of cool money in for interesting rural projects. They build everything from solar panels to recycled water facilities. How do we understand the full picture of money and then help reprogram and focus it, not program, but refocus it on sustainability outcomes that are derived from grassroots input?
One thing I'll just clarify quickly on TCC is getting a planning grant is not a necessary precursor to an implementation grant. So those planning grants are terrific because doing that planning is really helpful to building the structure you need to do a successful implementation grant. One thing we are doing with our planning grant applicants is right now staff is having phone calls or meeting with each of them to talk through their progress and do a mini version of what you suggested, Secretary Blumenfeld, in terms of really trying to think about how can we connect dots also with other programs, as appropriate, whether it's other climate investment programs or, helping to understand what their needs are and do a little bit of sort of matchmaking if we're able to. And so we've been doing that, on a one-on-one basis with planning, with especially our round one planning grantees. So it is a start at what you're talking about.
The other, and our former vice chair is very familiar with this, like in the philanthropy world, there's also, for instance, the California Endowment. So the California Endowment has significant money, significant plan on how to transform many of these same communities, and they're looking at how to leverage their resources. Like, how are we thinking about how we co-leverage their resources, other foundations? One of the things that the Rockefeller brothers did, and I'm not suggesting we do this exact thing, but they had like chief resiliency officers in each city. With the federal program that we did, SC Squared, we had someone in the mayor's office that acted like a chief of staff for sustainability, and she helped coordinate all these activities. So thinking about like very focused, targeted resources in the communities that would help catalyze some of this transformative climate work would be another idea on the technical side of that work.
Mike, I know you have something.
Yeah, just a question on the TCC. There's a local, I agree with everything that's been said so far too, but there's a local leverage. Do you have a feeling for what that's averaged, or what's been our ability to leverage local
What our
resources?
average has been?
Or
We require 50%, and most
Most
places have exceeded
that,
it.
So these numbers here, we can also, there's a 50% local match that's also being leveraged. So we leverage that with other departmental resources, and you're starting to get into 3 and 4 factor, which is good.
Oh, I forgot to ask one
Go
thing.
ahead. Yeah.
So I know your team has been looking at the idea of a TCC summit, or whatever you want to call it, gathering, conversation. And so where does that stand, and what are the next steps for that?
Yeah, so we have been discussing when TCC began, when the bill was first passed that created the program, SGC hosted a TCC summit. Since that time, we now have a number of planning grants, implementation grants, and a number of complementary programs across other programs in state government. So we have been discussing trying to pull together a day that would be about TCC, but really talking about what does transformation look like? Because I think a couple of things that we have learned is it doesn't look the same everywhere. So what would it look like in a rural community versus a very urban community? Fresno is very different than Watts. So really having that conversation, and then thinking about also how it complements and fits with other programs that the state runs or others are running. So we've been thinking about that conversation for later this spring, which also just brings that conversation of what transformation looks like out into a more public forum.
Great, look forward to that.
I have a question building on Jared's question, which is sort of more at a smaller scale, but I should know this, but I'll ask anyway. So you've talked about a number of different programs, obviously AHSC and TCC being the big grant programs, but then also the high-speed rail connection, the research piece. Then how are you, and maybe this is the subject of the retreat, but how are you thinking about leveraging those toward sort of what Jared was talking about in terms of, taking the lessons learned from TCC and sort of saying, how do we bring that to high-speed rail? How do we bring that to that conversation? What kinds of research projects are you doing on the climate side to advance that work? So how are you just internally integrating some of that work?
Yeah, and I think this is a lot of what we've been thinking about organizationally this year. And I think as SGC has grown, we've added programs. And I think what we're starting to see as over a lot of experience are the connective threads across our programs. So we have questions around housing, questions around rural communities, or other topics that just really cut across programs. And so I think trying to think about opportunities where we can address some of those in a cross-programmatic fashion is one piece of what we've been trying to do. And then, I think it is, with AHSC, we can see those projects have a transformative effect as well. So I think really just trying to capture more of what we're seeing on the ground as projects are being implemented. But then a lot of it is organizationally for us right now is really trying to think about how we leverage some of those connections. So maybe in April or June, we'll have a better answer for you, but that's what we're trying to work on a lot.
Great. And then I had one follow-up question really quick, which was, it's sort of a follow-up. It's actually not exactly a follow-up question. A lot of what we heard folks talk about when they were doing introductions and have been talking about is sort of this idea of regional, a more regional approach to what sustainable growth looks like or strategic growth looks like, and thinking regionally because of high-speed rail is a regional project by definition. The wildfires are regional by definition. So are many other climate impacts, right? You know, I get to ask this because I'm new and I don't know, but what you mentioned the MPOs and the role of the MPOs. What has that relationship looked like? So what is the SGC MPO to local planning relationship? How can we think strategically about engaging with the MPOs as we're kind of thinking about doing this work, both at the state level, but also really infusing it into the regional planning process?
Yeah, and Bob can probably give a good historic picture of that. I'd be happy to talk about how we're thinking about it looking ahead.
Why don't you
Okay, I mean, so this has been an ongoing conversation since the inception of the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program. And it came up again when we adopted guidelines last fall. And so we have gone back and really been trying to think through how can we use AHSC to more strategically support projects that align with and support implementation of sustainable community strategies. So we've been in conversation once again with the MPOs to talk through what that can look like. You know, I think there has been discussion over time of, is it a regional allocation? Is it establishing a set of regionally specific criteria that we could integrate into? So if you are from a given MPO, there are a set of evaluation criteria that align with your region's goals, whether it's for your SCS or for housing or something. So these are ongoing conversations we're having of just thinking about how we can better partner to align that investment, to really ensure that what we're seeing are investments that are going to support, especially SB 375 implementation.
Let me
Yeah.
I mean, there's piece a lot of it together, but you know, in transparency, I mean, the MPOs had wanted to disperse the money themselves,
Right.
and because I guess because of that was the way to assure alignment between their regionally specific strategies and the money that was being given through the AHSC grant. And then there were all sorts of iterations about everything from no involvement to full grant making by the MPOs. And I don't think we fully resolved it very well. It sort of got resolved in that the money was given to the Growth Council. The MPOs made their play with the legislature to try to get the money back. They didn't get it, and so the Growth Council went upon its business, and the MPOs, I think to varying degrees, decided to play or not to play. And you know, it never really got fully resolved, I think, to everybody's satisfaction. And I think perhaps it can never get resolved to everybody's satisfaction. And we've just got to move along with our business. So I think there's no downside into trying to see how to bring the two groups together and how to be more inclusive of the MPOs. I mean, Luis could speak to kind of what role they're playing at the moment, and I think it's a fairly modest role, but maybe, you know, I'm not aware of it all.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of regular conversation, and we do see letters of support as primarily the way we see engagement for applications that will come in. So you'll see them from the various MPOs. So, you know, and then I've started to just have one-on-one conversations with the heads of the different MPOs, especially with the focus on the Big Four as a starting point to see what might be possible. And I think there's with the release of the SB 150 report late last year or early this year, whenever, that, you know, that also sort of sparked a new conversation. So I think that's opened the door again to really think about what that can look like.
Well, and it's just something for us to think about going forward, but especially given SB 375 and the governor's strong focus, right, on growth and housing and transportation, it might be worth not necessarily thinking about sort of past how do we get the MPOs here, but is there a role for the state on the executive council of the MPOs? I mean, is there some way that we could better integrate these two things, given that there's going to be so much need to Jared's point of just trying to move in a direction that's a smart direction and leveraging a bunch of resources that we at the state have on how to do that. So it's just something to think about that I've been noodling on for 2019.
The other thing I would add is, we've also gone through a lot of iterations around geographic distribution. Maybe not surprisingly, but in the first few rounds, the grants were much more weighted towards Northern California, essentially, because I think the Northern California groups were just better tied into Sacramento and knew how to play the game. And LA and SCAG seemed to kind of want to go their own way, and they got very few grants. Over time, I think the Growth Council staff has done a really good job of bringing about much more geographic diversity to the point where I don't think it's so much of a problem, but we've had to work on it quite a bit. And I think LA is now getting, LA region and San Diego regions are now getting sort of their fair shares of the money. So we've kind of overcome that hurdle, but the relationships have tended to be much stronger, as you might expect, with the regions around us.
Yeah, I do think that's one of the successes of the technical assistance program, has been really helping some areas. Some places that said, oh, this program isn't for us, now have successful awards. So that really is, and the program has adjusted over time. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think as we're, a key part of the title of our council is Strategic Growth Council, and really thinking strategically about how we grow at the state, how do we support our communities, both rural and urban. Certainly, I was very inspired by the governor in his inaugural address talking about how we are one California, and we are really bridging, and his effort and focus to really bridge urban and rural communities together. And I think as we start to think about all of the programs that the council has, all of the activities that we as council members are doing, how do we integrate that into the work that we're doing throughout? And just something that I've been noodling on for 2019 as well, because it certainly really has set the stage, and I think in his inaugural address in my mind, and so how do we think about that throughout the programs that we have, the work that we're doing, really thinking strategically about how we're supporting all of our communities in California and addressing rural issues as well as urban issues. One thing you mentioned, Louise, technical assistance. We do have, so we received $1.1 million to do a new technical assistance pilot with UC Cooperative Extension last year. That I failed to mention, we actually, that's up and running, and the community education advisors are out in the field working with farmers and ranchers right now on application assistance, with a big focus on socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers as well. So we're starting to really think holistically at our department as far as outreach and engagement with farmers and ranchers about technical assistance. We have legislation as well that we're working on this year, 2377, thinking about how we at the department, how all of our other sister agencies are thinking about technical assistance. As you proposed, really looking holistically at how we support communities, whether they're farmer and rancher communities or whether they're urban communities, on technical assistance is something that I'm looking forward to hearing more about as well.
Other thoughts on what things we haven't talked about for 2019? We have got to a lot. We have talked about many things, but there are more to talk about. Wade.
Sure. So my recollection of the SGC and its inception was this effort to try to bring the agencies together and to share information about the resources they're allocating, and then working to sort of strategically coordinate those. And I think like a decade ago, that was really difficult and frankly didn't happen. in part because all of our, institutional divisions were pretty rigid and agencies were pretty protective of their programs. And so SGC, this is my recollection, really struggled initially because it was like, well, what are we doing? And how are we actually changing our funding and programs to be more strategic? And it wasn't until these resources became available through the GGRF that the council gained momentum around, hey, this is how we can work together. But I do think that it's sort of an unfinished business, or really not even unstarted business around really how we get strategic around each of our spending towards growth in the state. Our resources agency, we have a $15 billion budget every year that we're spending in the state, right? And there are agencies larger than ours in the state. And so to Jared's point around, these programs are catalytic, no doubt, and they should be the attention of how to optimize them, but they are just not of a scale that we're going to be able to transform the state. And frankly, not even the current state budget isn't, so that's where we get the federal government, et cetera. So the question in my mind is, how does SGC run the most catalytic grant program available, but then really identify, okay, then how do we build off this, get more resource coordination, strategic coordination across the state to really, build on this work, and then provide tools for other communities. Because even if we, let's say, abide the SEHA recommendation of $140 million a year, that's 3, communities getting TCC. That's important, but we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, across the state that would probably want them. So I just think let's get these, let's keep these programs on track, but also let's challenge ourselves to think really big in terms of what we need to do.
Actually, wait.
Oh,
all the way
sorry.
down first.
I didn't-
That's
yeah,
all right.
of course.
It's hard with a straight table.
If I can just echo that comment and add to it as well, that we could be doing some good work also in terms of deconflicting some of the goals across our programs, and I think that there's a role for SGC to facilitate that discussion. We have amazing programs, but sometimes the message that goes out to the public and to the jurisdictions isn't necessarily aligned, and can lead to some confusion in terms of priorities and how best jurisdictions can apply for these various grants. I do see a role for SGC in taking a lead in kind of helping us facilitate that dialogue so that we're kind of both thinking big, but then also thinking in the same direction.
Sorry, Nicole.
I'm sorry, because you're totally outside my view. But so what are the mechanics of this conversation? Because I've heard a lot of great ideas and thoughts, but I don't know how to operationalize some of the thinking and make it into actual goals. Chair?
Gonna think about that and get back to you on it. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to, I guess, build a little bit on this MPO discussion. On many boards for MPOs, Caltrans actually does sit on those boards, and in many cases, I think in all cases, they're ex officio. But I think there are opportunities, right now, I guess, the state representation on those boards right now are advocating just for transportation. And I think we have to get out of that mindset and be prepared to advocate, for other state interests, including housing. And so maybe one opportunity is, how can SGC, leverage, some of the things that they do well and be able to maybe educate, departments such as Caltrans in terms of, how to, engage in some of these other areas where we are just advocating, kind of more of a global level as opposed to just thinking about transportation. So.
That's a great point. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've done in the past is to expose everybody to where the dollars in the state are spent. I think that's a good level. Basically, as you all know, so many of the dollars are already spoken for or have very strict restrictions on. I mean, as I recall, transportation is where most of the money is spent in the state, and then I think housing probably comes after that. And then there are certain, again, you guys know this far better than I, but there's certain commissions and jurisdictions that already have their claws into that money. And so when you start to peel that away, what we can influence becomes more limited. But we've got to try to figure out how to influence. You know, what ways are there that the SGC and the strategies that you all collaboratively develop can influence the transportation money and the housing money. And as new housing money comes available, you know, as we think about as they think about reinventing the wheel within the agency, how can you actually use SGC strategies and philosophies to influence that money? And some of that starts back at the, I guess, initial appropriations, or at the initiative level, where some of the monies are actually created. And that's a place where staff can help as they influence the legislation. But it'd be useful, I think, for everybody to see where the money's spent, how much it's spoken for, what's available for us to influence, and then you know, begin to move from there. Because I think as you know, both Jared and Wade have said, you know, we need to have far more reach than what we. Even $400 million is a lot of money, but it's nothing compared to what we need to achieve.
Just following up on that, and I didn't actually mean to dismiss Nicole's question, which was a good one, but now these two comments have made me start thinking about it more, and it does seem like it would be useful for us to sit down and with others and figure out that question, which I think is a really good one, sort of where is the money, but also where are those leverage points? So where are we already on an MPO board, and who can we sit down with and educate about these priorities? Who's already in that seat, right? Who's already doing that work and taking a perspective from the state to those boards? So where are the opportunities there? Where are the opportunities on technical assistance? Looking at the current budget, there's lots of different pots of money for technical assistance in the current budget, many of which are about housing or transportation or conservation or resources of some kind. Can we look at those different pots and say, where are there opportunities to either combine with existing technical assistance or just take lessons learned to that place? That just seems like a smart kind of starting to look for those leverage points in very specifically and operationalize them. And I don't know the answer to this, but are there criteria that we're using currently in TCC or AHSC that could be advocated for in other programs as a set of criteria, as some other program is developing criteria? So that's another thing to look at. It is a great moment when lots of these discussions are happening and new money is being put on the table. So maybe we can start working together to find out where those leverage points are and actually really saying, what do we already have that we could bring to this conversation? Jared?
I think that's a great idea. And just following up from what Bob was saying, the gas tax, for instance, you know, a lot of the greenhouse gas reduction fund money goes to transportation. But to Bob's point, the transportation world dwarfs what we're spending. So we really need to kind of think about, with the passage of the gas tax and the failure of the repeal, it doesn't make sense that greenhouse gas reduction money is going to supplement kind of run-of-the-mill transportation stuff, instead of thinking about how we'd get language from the Strategic Growth Council into the gas tax funding so that all the money that we use for transportation is infused with the criteria that Kate was talking about. Because those criteria are worth their weight in gold. They took, you know, Bob lost all his hair. It took 10 years. I mean, this is what the current legacy of the Strategic Growth Council is, all the projects and the amazing work that you've done. And I don't want to lose focus on Nicole's point that yes, we do need to make sure that we have enough money in there to do the TCC programs themselves. This is kind of an and, at the same time, really making sure that, you know, these very, very large budgets, and I've spent some time with Caltrans on, for instance, the I-710, which is the freight corridor from the San Pedro ports to the Inland Empire, has more trucks on it per day than any other highway in the United States. And when it comes to putting in like a zero-emission freight corridor into it, it's nearly impossible, right? Because it's tough. Maybe this was historic, but it was tough. It's tough working with Caltrans sometimes. And so how do we overcome those internal things? If we can't get a zero-emission freight corridor on the I-710, we're not going to get it anywhere, and we're not going to be able to have a goods movement system that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, of which 50% come from the transportation sector. So like some inward looking, I guess, is what Bob and I heard Kate saying. I had a question for you, Louise, which is, can you explain, so how do the numbers get generated for TCC? This is just an annual appropriation, and what's that annual appropriation based on? Do they look for you for input? I mean, is there a process, or is it just a number?
That generally happens outside of my purview, but it's an annual appropriation. The $40 million is actually consistent with what was in last year's budget. There was a $10 million appropriation that had also happened. Those two were combined to create the $50 million to have a slightly larger award size for round 2. And so I believe that number, that $40 million, carries over from last year. So so for round 2, we actually combined 2 appropriations to create $50 million.
But if I can just interject, and I'm learning too, so I don't know all the details, but so there's like the governor's appropriation, and then of course there's the whole process, then the legislature weighs in. So we met with, who do we meet with, Mike? The chair of the budget, the consultant for the chair of the budget committee in the assembly, I think, whoever that is, Assemblymember Ting's office, I think. And he was saying, not only do you have to reckon with the budget process, but there's a separate committee for just greenhouse gas reduction fund money. I'm sure you guys probably know this already, but I'm just saying, it's not just the initial appropriation that we got. There's now an opportunity. You know, I'm never going to give up on this. There's now an opportunity during the legislative process over the budget, but then there's like a separate committee. I don't know. It seems like a hard needle to thread, but seems like there's still opportunity for this year. You know what I mean? There's many moving parts and players.
I'm glad we have public members, because I'm not sure we can do that. Yeah.
Did I say something totally wrong? Oh, God. Sorry.
I have a few other things. You know, there's the sort of, I'll call it the hard side to what we do, which is all the funding work and how that all happens. There's also a soft side that you all leaders of different agencies, and so much of what has to happen in any organization, any government, is the work that goes on between people. And the priorities you set, the way you communicate, how you impress upon people within each of your organizations that you have expectations about them getting out of their silos and working collaboratively and together, I think is a really important part of of the reason the council was set up. And it's sort of that soft side, I think, that can transform organizations and change cultures. You know, this government has a particular culture. Every agency has its own type of culture. Some of those cultures like to work collaboratively. OPR is probably one of them because it's a very small agency. Others, like transportation, I think, has had a history of working sort of on its own. And Brian Kelly worked very hard to push that culture, to move it to become much more collaborative. But I think the soft side of what you all do, and you know, it's like raising a child. Every day, every little signal is incredibly important about setting expectations about how people, it's much easier to work in a silo, much more efficient, quicker, but in the end, I think we're not going to achieve the kinds of goals that I think all of you, I mean, I'm incredibly impressed by just hearing each of you talk and the way you all understand what this group needs to do. I think part of that is because the group's moved along, and I think part of that is because the governor selected people that he believes want to and can work collaboratively. But the soft side is just as important as the hard side, and in the end, you know, that's going to be an important legacy, I think, for each of you to leave. So. Anyway, this is a fantastic conversation. We haven't had one so open since I missed the first SGC meeting because I got appointed in time for the second. So in my tenure, this has been a transformative conversation.
Oh, no, it was very open before you joined, Bob.
I probably listened in on that first meeting.
To that point, and just going back to operationalizing, because I like to do that too, you brought up, Louise, and I just want to echo and support and I feel this way about OPR as well, just the need to better communicate to the other agencies and to the governor's office and to Sacramento writ large what we do, because it isn't clear, both to Sacramento, but also to local planners, local governments, and others whom we touch. It isn't clear even to a lot of people here, and I think that SGC has done a really great job in redoing its website. I will just say we're doing that too. Ours is fairly terrible. Well, it's not terrible, but there are worse state websites. But it's not super easy to tell what we do from it. And I can't tell you the number of times I go over to the governor's office and someone asks me what OPR and SGC are. And if the governor's office doesn't know, that's sort of a problem, right? So we should really be working and doing everything I feel like we can as members of the council to be amplifying that and drawing those connections, because I don't think they're being drawn as much as they could be. So that's part of your soft side thing, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to tag onto that too. So and I think that's one of the big benefits of the technical assistance is it's also a voice that's getting the word out there, and the planning grants are a voice that are getting the word out there. Those are typically pretty focused on a project, and I know that's where the ILG piece is a more broad focus. What else are we doing? So I see like almost another silo that's below your silos, which is this local government piece. And I won't pretend to speak on behalf of 400 city managers, but there's a vacuum, just really a lack of knowledge. And then when you start to explain, there's just almost a need to have a decoder ring or some kind of something that breaks down and puts this value or this need on par with all the other competing values at the local government level. And so how are we, or what's the ILG piece for strategically putting this on par with what are the other competing values at the local level?
Yeah, so one nice thing about the ILG, so the Institute for Local Government, as I mentioned, is part of this $2 million appropriations. We have a $1 million contract with them. So it's taking more of a place-based approach. So most of our technical assistance has to date been focused around programs, so whether it's active transportation or sustainable ag land conservation. So with this ILG approach, we can take more of a place-based approach. So really thinking about working with a location to understand their needs. And then I think we're still working to figure out how that interfaces with our technical assistance providers, who could then come in, and so you figure out what their needs are, and then we're able to help sort of match make a little on programs. I also think this is where Senate Bill 1072 presents a tremendous opportunity, which is, again, taking more of a place-based approach. So you're really being able to marry more of a ground-up, sort of engagement and vision with some of our programs, which are a little bit more top-down. And so I think we're still trying to understand what that looks like, but see tremendous opportunity in that it will allow a bit more of a holistic approach to understand community needs, how to build that capacity and access to resources. Does that help? Okay.
I think if I can just follow up with one thought. It's so manage a city of 100,000 folks like I do as a city manager, and you've got crime issues you're dealing with right now. Trees are toppling over, and you got all these kinds of things. And in order to have a concept that resonates, when you start talking about carbon emission reductions and vehicle miles traveled, people start to glaze over quickly. But when you start talking about public health and the health of the elected, your constituents, and then you start talking about your drinking water, you have to put it into terms that truly resonate. And so I'm just looking for strategies for how we kind of go forward. Things I'm noodling on for 2019. That's the buzzword here. How can we translate the large scale things that we're trying to accomplish and put it in a language that will resonate locally?
And not to get too philosophical, I think one thing I often say to people is to ask people, what are you trying to do? Not what do you want to know, or here's a program that I can match you, but what are you trying to do? And if you went and asked 538 city managers across California, you're going to get a slightly different version, but it's going to help you to understand the context in which they're trying to work across all of these competing issues. And so I do think that, again, is where when you take more of a place-based approach, you're able to look at some of that. And so I think being able to marry those two presents a lot of opportunity. How we better message that, I think, is a good project for us to think about over the year and on. I'm sure we probably won't solve it all, but we'll try.
I do think there's a lot more alignment of goals at the local level and the state level than we think. And We just have to start articulating the rationale behind our goals, and then I think we're going to get a lot more cooperation at the local to state level.
So Kate, do you hope that we are merging all these thoughts and ideas into goals? Or is that an outcome?
Maybe I will, is there something you would like for us as staff?
Just what you
Is
want,
there
Liz,
something we
more
could
work.
do that would be helpful to report back on this to the council? On the conversation, it could be synthesizing, or if there are
A
ideas.
couple things, but Wade, go ahead.
I mean, first of all, I really appreciate Nicole asking the question of, okay, this is great, but what does this actually mean? How are we going to address it? And I'm struggling a little bit because this is our first meeting. And so we're sort of introducing our philosophy and observations to this while you're working to develop a 2019, plan of attack. So I'm not sure I would be able to articulate, to you what I would suggest based on the conversation, but it does seem like it could be constructive for you and your staff to go off and reflect on this, particularly given that you're going to be on a retreat early next month, and talk about how it could inform the 2019 plan. I don't think anything that we're saying is suggesting, diverting your focus from continuing to improve and strengthen, already great grant programs, but really how to integrate some of these broader observations and themes in the work could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. The one thing that, and this may be a Sloan thing or your staff thing, is, you've brought up a couple times that I've been thinking about a lot, this whole technical assistance question, and I think it would actually be very helpful, at least to me and maybe to others, to see where in the budget technical assistance has been thrown in and where there's potential alignment of the goals of that technical assistance, because that could be very efficient and help to advance a lot of what we've talked about. This group has spent a lot of time thinking about technical assistance and developing programs with HCD and others in a very coherent way. And if there's, somebody over here doing a new one with basically the same goals, that probably doesn't make very much sense. So I just think that would be helpful to kind of think that through. And if that's something we could kind of look at and see where we think there's alignment, especially with some of the new money on the table, that seems like a smart idea.
Another potential idea would be, I don't know how many field trips you help create a year, but understanding so for instance, with Fresno, they got $70 million, like how is that working? Talk to them, meet with them, like really focused on TCC, I think Watts was another example. How do we see what's happening and get best kind of case studies from that? And then secondly, pick a place that you determine needs help. It could be somewhere that we've already picked, like Pacoima, and then have all of us give you the budgets that we currently spend on Pacoima from all our agencies, and kind of do a tabletop exercise just to understand what it is that we're bringing from a outside Strategic Growth Council perspective, and how that could work together, just to understand it.
Very interesting. I like that idea. Is that enough, Louise, for you to go on for right now? You want us to keep throwing things at you?
Yeah. Writing it all down.
We got lots of other stuff you can know. Just kidding. No, that's a really, I really like this focus on just everyone's focus on sort of aligning values and resources and criteria, and just thinking about how to much better leverage what is not it's a huge amount of money from some perspectives, but it's not in the state budget perspective, or in the need perspective. So that seems really smart. And we'll obviously do at OPR whatever we can to support that as well. Anyone else on this topic? I know we have some public comment, so thank you, Louise. So 3 cards on this topic, and I think we're doing 3 minutes a speaker, as we have been traditionally. I was told I could change that, but I'm not going to. The amazing power I have in this chair seat. Meg Arnold, I have from Valley Vision. Do I hit this? Is that what I do? Okay.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Meg Arnold. I'm with an organization called Valley Vision, which is based here in the Sacramento region. We operate across the SACOG, 6-county region around the capital, and also down into northern San Joaquin Valley. We're also connected statewide through partnerships like the California Stewardship Network and the statewide network of regional climate collaboratives, which is called ARCA. I'm on the executive committee for ARCA and as well for the Climate Adaptation Collaborative here in the Sacramento region. And within Valley Vision, our work, this is just as context for you guys, our work that I'm involved with focuses on the clean economy, which we define as being climate responsive and climate alert, in the context of focusing on the livability or quality of life in our 6-county region, which includes, importantly, the economic vitality of that region as well. So really seeing an integration of those two, both climate and economic health across the region. And we do intersect and interact with SGC on a number of different fronts. I've been involved with both the TCC planning grant that was awarded to Sacramento and more peripherally with the recent TCC implementation grant that was recently awarded, and thank you all and to staff for those. Also with the SB 1072 that Louise mentioned, both as it was working its way through the legislature and very much looking forward to interact with SGC staff during this next phase of setting guidelines. We recently supported a regional report out on the 4th climate assessment under the Climate Research Program and hosted that over at UC Davis for an audience of about 150 folks, which was really a great way to get the message out about the depth of that level of insight. So I just wanted, with that context, I just wanted to hit on a few of the things that I heard you all talk about today that I think has a lot of resonance in our region. First of all, the conversation about local and regional planning and how best to support that, and a little bit of the conversation about the MPOs. We're fortunate to be able to work with SACOG, who has incorporated very deliberately and consciously and working in strong partnership as a precursor to their update to their MTPSCS, a deep regional look at where economic growth is, how we're doing on inclusiveness, how we're doing on prosperity, brought the Brookings Institution in, and really out of an intent on SACOG's part to really make sure that the MTP and SCS is integrated into the likely and desired economic future of the region and for our residents. So to the extent that there are mechanisms that SGC can employ to promote that kind of collaborative work at the regional level, be very much supportive of that. We're also, in generally, big believers at working at the regional scale, both because that's, there was a comment here about the human relationship side of things. I think that's the scale at which many of us operate our human professional networks and have those relationships. It's also the scale at which our economies work in this enormous state of ours, and it's also the scale at which many of our environmental ecosystems also operate and differentiate from each other. So we at Valley Vision be a big supporter, helping you work through ways to think about interacting at the regional level. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right. I'm just getting used to this timer thing. It's confusing. Julia Jordan. Yeah. Start throwing things at people.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Julia Jordan. I'm with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, based here in Sacramento, but we work with communities in the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, and Eastern Coachella. And thank you for the opportunity to comment and just have this open conversation with you. It's been really interesting for me to learn more about your priorities and kind of hear people discuss that. Mostly I just wanted to kind of comment on TCC and making sure that, given that this is such a great opportunity for communities to create projects and implement projects that are going to support healthy and sustainable communities, such a valuable program, we basically just kind of want to emphasize what Jenny and others have mentioned about rural communities and the importance of rural communities in that conversation as well. And thank you all for kind of acknowledging that and really having that eye towards, not just urban, but also rural and the connections between the two. We work with disadvantaged rural and also unincorporated communities across the state, which we know have huge potential and can be part of that conversation around sustainable growth. But they're also, as we know, very under-resourced. So we're interested in making sure that those investments go to these communities. And it's important that there's equitable opportunity and that those communities have the ability to be really competitive for TCC funding. And this includes the eligibility issue that was brought up earlier, thinking about unincorporated communities and making sure that they are explicitly part of TCC funding. And that's kind of a small thing, but a really important thing, because these are areas that have a lot of potential for growth and can be part of the climate solutions as well. And also, I'm excited to hear all this conversation about technical assistance, because that's another place where we think could be ramped up in terms of under-resourced communities being able to actually have the time and be able to work through these lengthy and really challenging applications. So thinking about, even in TCC, how to make sure that the grants are actually available and able to be applied for and meaningfully utilized. So thank you again, and I look forward to working with you and seeing what 2019 brings.
Thanks, Julia. All right, now I have Phoebe Seaton.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks. Phoebe Seaton, I'm also with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, but speaking on behalf of SEHA. At the moment, we're a member of SEHA, which is a statewide organization advocating for environmental justice. There are 10 member organizations. Where one of them have been very, very active in a lot of SGC's activities, in particular TCC. So I wanted to, again, echo the support for transformative climate communities, kind of expanding the pot, the transformative climate community pot, expanding the reach of the TCC program through both TA planning and implementation grants. Also, I think I've said already in meetings with several of you so far in this term, how much we appreciate SGC's commitment to community-driven change and community being part of the planning and the implementation and the research, and look forward to working with you to doubling down on SGC's commitment to making sure communities are part of TCC, AHSC, the SALC program, and TA, and expanding that commitment to all of the partner agencies and other agencies within the state. We also are finally getting off the ground with some of the research grants, the climate resilience research grants. We're a community partner on several. Again, just appreciation for the Strategic Growth Council's acknowledgement that sort of community-driven and community participation in research is really what's going to build long-term resilience. I'm going to appreciate those opportunities and look forward to, I think, building out those programs, building out 1072, building out the Transformative Climate Communities program and all of SGC's programs in rural and urban communities alike with all of you. Thanks so much.
Phoebe. All right, any other general public comment in the House? Okay. I think that's it. I think I get to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting, great conversation, and thanks again to staff for all that hard work. And we'll see you next time.